A cold mist clings to the stones of a medieval bridge at dawn. The keeper steps from his tollhouse, holding a strange and quiet power. These men were far more than simple toll collectors. They were guardians, engineers, spies, and sometimes even executioners, living a life wrapped in duty and shadow. By the end of this, you will understand the entire medieval world through the eyes of the man who held its most crucial crossing. We are about to uncover their hidden world, from the immense weight of their responsibilities to the dangerous secrets they were forced to keep. Think of them as a mix of a modern border agent, a building inspector, and the neighborhood watch leader, all rolled into one intimidating figure. What dark truths could a river whisper to the one person who listened to it every single day? His entire world was a narrow strip of wood and stone suspended over moving water. This was not merely a crossing, it was a small, fiercely independent kingdom, and the keeper was its absolute ruler. His castle was the tollhouse, a sturdy structure often built directly into the bridge itself. From this single room, he lived, worked, and watched. One door opened to the road, where travelers awaited passage, and the other opened onto the bridge, his sovereign territory. This was his office, his fortress, and his home, all in one. He knew every crack in the masonry, every groan of the timber, as if they were the pains of his own body. His domain was fortified with gatehouses that could be barred against trouble, and some of the grander bridges even featured a drawbridge mechanism that he could raise to cut off the kingdom entirely. High above the traffic, a small chapel might be nestled into the stonework, a silent reminder that his duty was not just to man, but to God. The air on his bridge was a thick tapestry of sensation. It was filled with the sharp clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, the lowing of cattle being driven to market, and the constant, animated chatter of merchants haggling over tolls. Beneath it all was the low, guttural stench of the river itself, a smell of mud, fish, and things best left unnamed, and through every moment, a quiet dread hummed in the back of his mind. A single spark from a blacksmith's cart could mean a fire that would devour his wooden kingdom in minutes. A particularly harsh winter could mean ice shoving against the piers, threatening a collapse that would sever the lifeline of the entire region. This bridge was not a silent, static thing. It was a living, breathing entity, and its keeper had to listen to its every whisper. His authority began with a sacred vow spoken before the local lord or the bishop himself. This oath was not a simple formality. It was a binding promise that tied his soul to the stones of the bridge. He pledged to uphold the king's peace, to enforce the law of the land, and to maintain the crossing for all loyal subjects. This solemn duty was the foundation of his entire existence. His first and most constant task was the collection of tolls. Money was not always the currency. A farmer might pay with a chicken or a sack of grain. A merchant could offer a length of cloth from his cart. For those with nothing, their toll was paid in labor, spending a day under the keeper's watchful eye, hauling stones or clearing silt from the riverbanks. Every transaction was a negotiation, a test of the keeper's judgment and his knowledge of local value. Beyond the tolls, his duties were endless. He was the bridge's constant guardian, walking its length at dawn to check for damage from the night. He cleared away wind-blown branches and the muck left by passing herds. With a hammer and chisel, he performed minor repairs, repacking mortar between stones to prevent the slow creep of decay. Safe passage meant more than a sturdy road. It meant keeping the way clear of thieves and cutpurses who saw the crowded bridge as a hunting ground. His day started before the sun painted the sky, with a slow walk along the parapet, his hand brushing the cold, damp stone. He listened to the water below, judging its mood and height. He inspected the wooden supports for new cracks or the telltale softness of rot. As the world woke up, the gate was unlocked and the flow of humanity began. From that moment there was no rest. He moved between carts and pilgrims, collecting his dues, settling petty disputes, and directing traffic with a sharp whistle or a firm command. When dusk fell and the last traveler was across, he barred the heavy gates, plunging his narrow kingdom into a profound silence. This was a 7-day, a week existence, a cycle of duty broken only by the holy days of the church or the sudden terror of a flood or fire. There were no weekends, no vacations, only the bridge and its endless needs. But the keeper's true power was measured in coin and kind. His tollhouse was the heart of a miniature economy, a place where the value of everything was constantly debated under the shadow of the law. Every person, animal, and cart that approached his gate was assessed with a practiced eye, its passage taxed according to a complex and often bewildering set of rules. The system was designed to be meticulous. A merchant's heavy wagon was not charged a flat fee. Instead, the keeper would note the size of its wheels, as larger wheels put more strain on the wooden planking. A man driving a herd of pigs to market paid by the head, counting each squealing animal. Even a lone pedestrian was not exempt. A nobleman on horseback might pay a silver penny for the privilege of a swift crossing, while a common farmer on foot might offer a single egg. The bridge was a great leveler, but it still respected the rigid lines of the medieval social order. Payment itself was a fluid concept. Coins were precious and rare in the countryside. More often than not, the keeper's strongbox was filled with the real wealth of the land. A peasant might pay his toll with a chicken, a wedge of cheese, or a bundle of firewood. A blacksmith could offer a newly forged nail or the sharpening of the keeper's axe. For those with absolutely nothing, their own sweat became the currency. They would spend a day in servitude to the bridge, cutting reeds from the riverbank or hauling stone for repairs. This immense control over the lifeblood of trade was a constant temptation. A corrupt keeper could easily pocket an extra coin, claiming the official toll was higher than it truly was. He might invent a new fee for a fictional bridge where tax or charge a merchant double for having a supposedly overladen cart. The potential for abuse was as wide as the river itself, yet the risk was unimaginable. If a keeper was caught cheating his lord or the town council, the punishment was severe and public. He could be fined an amount he could never hope to repay, thrown into a dungeon, or even banished from the community, his name disgraced forever. His entire life, his oath, and his honor were balanced on the simple, honest clink of a coin dropped into his palm. This narrow strip of stone was more than a crossing, it was a financial choke point, and the keeper alone decided who paid and how much. Yet the keeper's power extended far beyond collecting tolls. He was the law on his bridge, a de facto sheriff whose word was final the moment you stepped onto his stones. His authority came from that sacred oath, granting him the right to question, to search, and to detain anyone he deemed a threat to the king's peace. The narrow, confined passage of the bridge was his greatest tactical advantage. A single barred gate could trap an entire party, turning the structure into a perfect spot for an ambush or a swift arrest. If a known cutpurse or a wanted man approached, the keeper could simply refuse them passage, effectively stranding them on the wrong side of the river until the local constables arrived. He worked hand in glove with these town watchmen, his bridge acting as a natural filter that caught the flotsam of the criminal world before it could reach the city streets. But this duty was fraught with very real physical risks. Confronting an armed band of mercenaries or a desperate fugitive was a terrifying prospect for a man who often worked alone. There are tales of keepers standing firm against groups of rowdy soldiers, their only weapon a heavy wooden club and the sheer force of their authority. In times of plague, his role became a matter of life and death for entire communities. He was the first line of defense, tasked with turning away travelers from infected towns, even if it meant leaving a desperate family with nowhere to go. He had to read the fear in a traveler's eyes, sniff out the faint scent of sickness, and make a brutal decision in an instant. Every stranger was a potential carrier of death, and the keeper at the gate held the power to stop that death from crossing his bridge. This was not a job for the faint of heart. It demanded a blend of sharp judgment, unshakable courage, and a willingness to face danger for the safety of those who slept soundly in the town beyond. Beneath the keeper's feet, the bridge was a structure in a constant, silent war. His true mastery was not just in law or finance, but in a desperate, ongoing battle against the elements themselves. Water was his eternal enemy. It seeped into the timber, inviting rot to gnaw at the very bones of his kingdom. In winter, it transformed into jagged ice floes that slammed against the stone piers with the force of a battering ram. His ear was trained to listen for new sounds, a groan from the supports that was different from the usual creaks of a busy day, a telltale shift in the stones underfoot that warned of a foundation giving way. He did not need to be a master mason, but he had to understand the basic principles that kept his world from collapsing. He knew that an arch distributed weight downwards and outwards to its supports. He understood that a blocked water channel increased pressure on the piers, and that a single rotten beam could compromise an entire section of decking. His tools were simple but vital. A heavy maul and iron wedges were used to split stone for repairs. A long, hooked pole allowed him to clear debris from the water channels and probe submerged timbers for soft spots. His most important tool was a chisel, constantly in use to repack crumbling mortar, a task as endless as it was critical. When a repair was beyond his own skill, his authority shifted from craftsman to foreman. The laborers who had paid their toll and sweat became his work crew. He would direct them, organizing a human chain to haul new timber or stack stone, his watchful eye ensuring every task was done correctly. A single poorly placed stone could mean a weak point, and a weak point could lead to a catastrophic failure that would sever the trade routes of an entire region. The keeper's most profound success was not a day of high traffic or a full strongbox, but a bridge that stood silent and strong through a brutal storm, its keeper listening to the wind and water, knowing his skill had once again held the line against chaos. His tollhouse was also a listening post, a place where secrets were as common as the river mist. Every face that passed his gate was a piece of a puzzle, and the keeper was the one who collected them all. This man was not just a guardian of stone and wood, he was an intelligence gatherer for the crown, the eyes and ears of the realm at its most vital crossroads. He knew the normal patterns of travel, the weekly rhythm of farmers and merchants. Any break in that rhythm was a note he would mentally record. The sudden arrival of a large band of armed men, even if they claimed to be simple mercenaries, was a report he was duty-bound to send to the local sheriff or his lord. The quiet passing of a nobleman in a plain cloak, trying to avoid notice, was a piece of information that could be worth more than a week's tolls. His position gave him a unique and powerful view of the world. He saw which merchants were growing rich and which were falling into debt. He noted the arrival of strangers from distant lands, their accents and their goods hinting at alliances or conflicts brewing far away. The simple act of counting travelers could tell a local lord whether a nearby village was thriving or if a famine was driving people from their homes. This flow of information was a two-way street. In exchange for his reports, the keeper received protection and a measure of authority. He was part of the system, a trusted node in a vast and slow-moving network of communication. But this duty was draped in moral shadows. His loyalty was a commodity that could be bought. A wealthy merchant, seeking to hide the true scale of his operations from the taxman, might slip the keeper a few extra silver coins to forget what he had seen. A conspirator plotting against the local lord could offer a small fortune for the keeper to remain silent about a midnight meeting on the bridge. The choice was a constant, quiet torment. Should he uphold his oath and report everything, knowing it could lead to a man's imprisonment or ruin, or should he accept the bribe, pad his own purse, and let the secret flow past him like the water under his feet? A single decision could mark him as the most loyal of servants or brand him a traitor. This silent trade in information meant the keeper held a fragile piece of the kingdom's stability in his hands, and no one but the river ever knew which way his loyalty truly flowed. Behind the formidable public face of the keeper was a home, a cramped and chaotic world shared with his family within the very walls of the tollhouse. This was not a life of separation where a man left for work in the morning and returned to a quiet hearth at night. Duty, danger, and domesticity were woven together into a single, unending tapestry. The entire family lived on the bridge, their private lives conducted in full view of the passing traffic. The main room of the tollhouse served as office, kitchen, and living quarters all at once. A heavy ledger book for tolls might share a table with the family's humble dinner bowls. At night, they slept in a small loft or a curtained-off corner, the sounds of the river and the occasional late-night traveler a constant lullaby. Privacy was a forgotten luxury. Every argument, every joyful moment, every childhood lesson happened within earshot of the road. The keeper's wife was far more than just a homemaker in this strange environment. She was a partner in the enterprise, a deputy keeper in all but name. When her husband was occupied with a repair or a difficult traveler, she would step forward to collect the tolls, her practiced eye just as sharp in assessing a cart's value. Many keepers' wives ran vital side businesses from the tollhouse door, selling cups of ale, simple loaves of bread, or hot pies to weary travelers desperate for a moment's respite. This small trade could mean the difference between mere subsistence and a modest comfort for the family, turning their strategic position into a small economic engine. The children, too, grew up in the shadow of the bridge. From a young age, they were given small tasks like sweeping the deck or watching for approaching travelers from the window. They learned the complex toll rates as other children learned nursery rhymes, their playground the narrow stone walkways high above the rushing water. Their entire world was this strip of stone, their father's authority the only law they truly knew. This life forged a family of immense resilience, bound together by shared responsibility and a constant, low hum of risk. A fire in the hearth was a comfort, but also a potential disaster if it spread. A stranger at the gate was a source of income, but could also be a threat to their safety. The bridge was their entire universe, a kingdom that provided their livelihood, but demanded their every waking moment in return. But the true test of a keeper's mettle came when the skies opened and the river began to rise. A gentle rain was a nuisance, but a prolonged storm upstream meant a wall of water was coming, and his bridge stood directly in its path. The first sign was a change in the river's voice, from a steady murmur to a low, angry roar. The water would turn from green to a churning, filthy brown, carrying entire trees and the wreckage of upstream barns in its powerful grip. This was the moment his quiet kingdom became a battlefield. His emergency duties began instantly. He would bar the heavy gates, physically blocking any foolhardy traveler from attempting a crossing that would mean certain death. He and his family would become a frantic warning system, shouting and signaling to those on both banks that the bridge was closed. If there was livestock trapped on the approach, he would help drive the panicked animals to higher ground, every second counting down to the flood's arrival. With the water rising at an alarming speed, he would then perform the most desperate of tasks. Using long poles and hooks, he and any men he could press into service would work from the bridge itself, trying to dislodge the massive tangles of debris. what they called ships that were piling up against the piers. Each collision was a hammer blow against the stonework. If a pier gave way, the entire arch would follow, collapsing into the torrent. This was a fight against pure chaos, a race to prevent the river from tearing his world apart piece by piece. Fire was an equally terrifying foe, a threat that could leap from a careless spark in a nearby house or a merchant's brazier overturned in the wind. The wooden planking and buildings of the bridge were like a bonfire waiting to be lit. At the first shout of fire, the keeper became a fire marshal. He would organize a bucket brigade, a human chain passing water hand over hand from the river below to douse the flames. His authority was absolute in this crisis, his commands cutting through the panic. He might even order the deliberate demolition of a section of the bridge to create a fire break, a brutal calculation to sacrifice a part in order to save the whole. In a world without sirens or professional firefighters, the bridge keeper was the first and last line of defense. His preparedness, his courage, and his willingness to stand firm when nature itself seemed to rebel were what separated a functioning crossing from a smoldering ruin or a pile of rubble in the river. The safety of the entire region rested on his shoulders in those critical hours, a weight as immense and powerful as the floodwaters themselves. This immense power over the flow of goods and people was a magnet for the criminal underworld, a constant temptation that tested the keeper's oath. The very authority that made him a guardian of the law could also make him its most effective breaker. For the right price, a keeper could turn a blind eye, and the bridge would become a gateway for every kind of forbidden trade. The scams were as varied as the travelers themselves. A corrupt keeper might underreport the number of cattle in a herd, pocketing the difference between what he charged the drover and what he officially recorded in his ledger. He could wave through a cart laden with smuggled silk or untaxed wine for a hefty bribe, the contraband passing in plain sight under his sanctioned gaze. Some keepers grew even more brazen, orchestrating elaborate shakedowns. He might suddenly declare the bridge unsafe, pointing to a minor crack that had been there for years, and demand an emergency repair fee from every merchant before allowing them to cross. Since he was the sole authority on the bridge's condition, no one could question his judgment. This was a simple but effective form of extortion, exploiting the traveler's desperate need to reach the market on time. The historical records are filled with the consequences of such greed. In one town, a keeper was caught systematically stealing from the tolls over many years. His punishment was not just a fine, but a very public shaming in the stocks, where those he had cheated could pelt him with rotten food. In a more severe case, a keeper who conspired with a band of river pirates to ambush wealthy travelers was executed for his crimes, his body left hanging from the very bridge he was sworn to protect as a grim warning to others. The choice was a daily high-stakes gamble. A single bribe could feed his family for a month, but discovery meant the utter ruin of his name, his livelihood, and potentially his life. The river did not just carry water, it carried secrets, and the keeper had to decide whether to sell them or sink beneath their weight. The keeper's strongbox made him a constant target for every desperate soul on the road. His tollhouse, while a seat of power, was also a trap, an isolated outpost known to hold coin and goods. This made him and his family a prime mark for robbery and violence. The threat of an outlaw's blade was a shadow that fell across his door with every sunset. In response, his home was also his fortress. The windows were narrow slits, barred with heavy iron. The main door was not a welcoming entrance, but a barrier of thick, studded oak, often reinforced with a massive crossbeam that could be dropped into iron brackets. Inside, a secret compartment might be hollowed out beneath the floorboards or behind a loose stone in the hearth, a last-second hiding place for the cash box if trouble came knocking. There are stories of keepers who stood their ground with legendary courage. One tale tells of an old keeper in the north who, when a band of thieves demanded entry, simply poured a cauldron of boiling stew from an upper window through a murder hole, sending the men scrambling back into the night. Another keeper, armed with nothing but a hunting bow, held 3 armed robbers at bay from his parapet until the town watch arrived at dawn, but not every story ended in victory. Records from a small town in France speak of a keeper found murdered in his home, the strongbox empty, a grim reminder that duty could carry the ultimate price. This ever-present danger meant the keeper slept with one ear open, his axe or club within easy reach. The jingle of coins in his lockbox was not just the sound of prosperity, it was a siren call to the lawless, turning his life into a perpetual state of watchful defense. Above the constant commerce and the threat of violence, the bridge was also a profoundly sacred space. Many of these stone crossings were crowned with their own small chapels, built directly into the fabric of the bridge itself. These were not just decorative afterthoughts, they were a declaration that this passage was under the direct protection of God and the saints. For the keeper, this meant his duties extended into the spiritual realm. He was often the caretaker of this holy place, responsible for keeping its candles lit, its floor swept, and its sanctity intact. Pilgrims traveling to distant shrines saw the bridge not just as an obstacle to cross, but as a milestone on their spiritual journey, a place to rest their weary feet and offer a prayer of thanks for safe passage thus far. The keeper interacted with these travelers differently. He was more than a toll collector, he was a gatekeeper to a sanctuary. A pilgrim's toll might be a simple prayer or a small, handmade offering rather than a coin. The keeper would accept these with a solemnity that a merchant's payment did not require. He might point a traveler toward the chapel or share news of the road ahead that he had gathered from other pilgrims, information that was as valuable to their souls as directions were to their bodies. In a world rife with physical danger, the belief that a bridge was a holy place offered immense comfort. It was seen as a safe corridor across a treacherous landscape, a strip of hallowed ground where evil spirits and malevolent forces held no power. The relics sometimes housed in the bridge chapel, perhaps a sliver of bone from a saint or a piece of a holy garment, were thought to radiate protection over the entire structure. This fused the keeper's practical and spiritual roles into one. By maintaining the chapel, he was performing a vital maintenance on the bridge's divine defenses. His daily rounds included ensuring this spiritual bulwark remained strong, that the rituals were observed, and that the space offered solace. When a storm raged or a flood threatened, his prayers were not just hopeful words, they were part of his professional toolkit, another layer of defense for the kingdom in his care. The bridge was a liminal place, a threshold between two worlds, and the keeper stood at its center, balancing the accounts of man with the mysteries of faith. The jingle of coins in the strongbox was only one part of his livelihood. A keeper's official wages were often sparse, forcing him to become an entrepreneur on his narrow strip of stone. His prime location was his greatest asset, a captive market of weary, hungry, and thirsty travelers, and he leveraged it with a shrewdness that would impress any modern business owner. The most common venture was a tiny tavern operating from the tollhouse door. His wife might sell cups of ale or rough cider from a barrel, along with simple, hearty food like bread, cheese, or a hot meat pie. For a traveler who had been on the road for hours, the chance to wash the dust from their throat and fill their stomach just steps from the crossing was a luxury they were eager to pay for. This was not just a convenience, it was a vital service that turned his home into a profitable wayside inn. Storage was another valuable commodity. A merchant heading into the town for a day's trading might not want to haul his entire stock of wool or wine through the crowded streets. For a small fee, the keeper would rent him a secure corner of the toll house or an outbuilding, guarding the goods until the merchant returned. This transformed the bridge into a kind of safe deposit box, a trusted neutral ground in a world full of thieves. Some keepers held official licenses to act as money changers. A traveler from a different region or country would need local currency to pay his tolls and buy goods in the town. The keeper, with his ready supply of coin, could exchange the foreign money for a fee, taking a small cut from every transaction, and beneath his very feet flowed another source of income. The fishing rights for the stretch of river around the bridge often belonged to him. He could set nets or lines, providing fresh fish for his family's table and a surplus to sell to passing travelers or to the town's market. This relentless hustle was not a choice but a necessity for survival. It required a sharp eye for opportunity and the energy to manage multiple trades at once. Between collecting a toll from a cart, he might be pouring a drink, haggling over an exchange rate, and directing a laborer where to store a merchant's trunk. His life was a masterclass in multitasking, proving that the true wealth of a bridge was not just in the tolls it collected, but in the ingenuity of the man who ruled it. A heavy leather-bound ledger sat on the keeper's table, its pages filled with a dense scrawl of names, numbers, and goods. This was not merely an account book, it was a living census of the medieval world, written day by day at the river's crossing. Every entry told a story: the record of a merchant from Flanders paying his toll in pepper and wax revealed the reach of long-distance trade routes. The note of a farmer driving 20 geese to the next village market painted a picture of local, small-scale commerce. The keeper, in his meticulous effort to account for every chicken and cartwheel, was creating an unparalleled record of ordinary life. His quill was an unintentional chronicle, capturing the ebb and flow of an entire society. The names he wrote down were more than just a list of payers, they were a map of human movement. By tracing the destinations travelers gave, we can see patterns of migration, the spread of new ideas, and the connections between distant towns. A sudden increase in travelers all listing the same distant city might hint at a pilgrimage announced by the church, or perhaps a call for laborers after a local harvest had failed. The goods recorded were a frozen moment in the economic life of the region. One page might show a dominance of wool and raw hides, pointing to a pastoral economy. Another, filled with entries for millstones, iron bars, and glass, suggests an area buzzing with construction and craft. The very handwriting in these ledgers tells its own tale. The keeper's script might start neat and formal in the morning, but as the day wore on and the traffic grew thick, it would often descend into a harried, ink-blotted scrawl, a silent testament to the relentless press of his duty. He never thought of himself as a historian, he was just doing his job, ensuring every toll was paid and every traveler was noted. Yet, centuries later, these fragile pages are more valuable to us than any king's proclamation. They give voice to the common people, the farmers, the peddlers, and the pilgrims whose lives would otherwise be lost to time. The grand narrative of history is often written in stone and parchment, telling of wars and coronations. But the true pulse of the medieval world, its daily breath and heartbeat, is preserved in the ink-stained pages of a bridge keeper's ledger. Of all the bridges in the medieval world, one stood alone as a legend, a city upon the water. London Bridge was not merely a crossing, it was a destination in itself, a teeming, chaotic, and magnificent street suspended over the Thames. For its keeper, this was not a quiet post in the countryside, it was like being the mayor of a small, wildly prosperous town that never slept. The bridge was so wide it was crammed with multi-story houses and shops, their upper floors jutting out so far that neighbors could almost shake hands across the alley. The air was thick with the smells of baking bread, melting candle wax, and the pungent odor of the tannery, all mixing with the ever-present river mist. At the southern end stood the massive stone gatehouse, its spikes often adorned with the grim warning of traitors' heads, a stark reminder of the king's justice that the keeper was sworn to uphold. Managing this marvel was the ultimate test of a keeper's skill. His challenges were magnified 100-fold. A simple cart accident could cause a traffic jam lasting for hours, with drivers shouting and horses growing restless in the cramped street. A fire in one of the wooden shops was a nightmare scenario that could race through the entire structure, a constant fear that required his vigilant eye. The noise was relentless, from the blacksmith's hammers to the constant calls of merchants and the rumble of carts on the cobbles, yet the privileges were immense. The keeper of London Bridge was a man of substantial power and prestige, answerable directly to the city's ruling council. He lived in one of the finest houses on the bridge, a testament to his status. His tolls were a river of wealth, funding not only the bridge's upkeep but also filling the city's coffers. We know the name of one such keeper, John Russell, who served in the 14th century. His life was a whirlwind of administration and authority, adjudicating disputes between shopkeepers, inspecting the water wheels under the arches that powered grain mills, and coordinating the army of laborers needed to constantly repair the worn timber starlings that supported the heavy stone piers. He walked a street that was both a vital artery and a deadly hazard, where the roar of the water rushing through the narrow arches, the famous "shooting the bridge," was a sound that signaled both the bridge's power and its perpetual danger. To be the keeper here was to stand at the very center of the medieval universe, a witness to every facet of life, from the grimmest executions to the most vibrant commerce, all happening on the stones under his feet. Across the sea in southern France, the stone arches of the Pont d'Avignon reached only partway across the Rhône River, a magnificent and unfinished monument. This was not just a bridge, it was a sacred highway for countless souls. Its primary purpose was to carry a river of pilgrims heading to the great shrine of St. James in Santiago de Compostela, making its keeper more than a toll collector. He was a guardian of faith. Control of this vital passage did not rest with a local lord or a town council, but with a powerful religious order, the Friars Pontiffs, or the Bridge Brothers. These monk engineers were dedicated to the holy work of building and maintaining bridges, seeing them as acts of charity and divine service. They appointed the keeper, a man who answered not to a king's taxman, but to God's own accountants. His duty was infused with a spiritual gravity absent from a purely commercial crossing. His ledger recorded not just coins, but prayers answered and miracles witnessed. According to a beautiful and enduring legend, the bridge itself was a miracle. A young shepherd boy named Bénez, it was visited by divine command, told to build a bridge across the wide and treacherous Rhône. When the skeptical bishop demanded proof, Bénez, it is said to have single-handedly lifted a massive stone into place, a stone no grown man could move, thus proving his holy mandate. This origin story wrapped the very stones in a layer of sanctity. For the keeper, every day was spent walking on hallowed ground. He was the steward of a legend, and his authority was amplified by the belief that Saint Bénézet himself watched over the bridge. Then came the slow, creeping disaster that changed everything. The Rhone's fierce currents, century after century, battered the arches. A flood in the 17th century dealt the final blow, sweeping several key arches away and rendering the bridge permanently broken, a haunting ruin that reached for the opposite bank it could no longer touch. For the keeper, this collapse was not just a professional setback, it was an existential crisis. His entire purpose, his kingdom, his spiritual and economic reason for being, was severed. The flow of pilgrims and their tolls dried up almost overnight. The powerful bridge brothers who had appointed him faded from relevance. What was left for a bridge keeper with no bridge to keep? His role shrunk from a prestigious, spiritually significant post to that of a simple caretaker for a relic. He became a guardian of a memory, showing curious visitors the remains of the chapel on the bridge where Bénez, it was said to be buried. His duty shifted from managing a vibrant, living artery to preserving a silent, stone corpse. The fate of the Pont d'Avignon is a stark reminder that the keeper's world was entirely dependent on the stones beneath his feet. When the bridge fell, his kingdom vanished into the river mist, leaving only a legend and a fragment of a song for the world to remember. A heavy iron ring, crowded with keys of every size, hung from the keeper's belt. Each key was a piece of his authority, a tool for locking gates, chests, and storage rooms, securing his small kingdom against the night. But the tools of his trade went far beyond these clinking symbols of power. His world was defined by a practical collection of objects, each one essential to the endless cycle of his duties. For the night watch, a shuttered lantern was his constant companion, casting a small, swaying pool of light along the damp stones, a beacon against the darkness and a warning to any who might approach with ill intent. Leaning against the tollhouse door within easy reach stood a long pike or a heavy wooden club. This was not for show. It was the final argument in any dispute, a stark reminder of his right to defend the bridge and himself. For a keeper on a particularly dangerous or important crossing, a loaded crossbow might be kept near the window, a deadly deterrent against a well-armed band. His role as engineer demanded another set of implements. A heavy maul and iron wedges were used for splitting stone or driving new timber piles. A long, hooked pole was vital for clearing debris from the water channels below, a task as constant as the river's flow. His most frequently used tool was likely a simple chisel, its blade worn from endlessly repacking the mortar between stones, fighting a silent war against decay and the relentless pressure of the weather. These were the instruments of physical labor, the extensions of his own hands in the battle to keep his world from crumbling. Inside the tollhouse, the tools of administration waited. Open on the central table lay his ledger, a thick, leather-bound book whose pages were filled with the Inkai fingerprints of his daily labor. Next to it sat a stone inkpot, a bundle of goose quills, and a shaker of fine sand for blotting the wet ink. This was the brain of his operation. With this quill, he translated the chaotic flow of life on his bridge into neat columns of numbers and names. Every sack of grain, every cartwheel, every silver penny was meticulously recorded, creating the official memory of the crossing. To certify important documents or to seal a bag of coin for transport to his lord, he would use his personal seal, pressing its unique design into warm wax. This small metal stamp was his signature, his word made solid, and it carried the full weight of his oath. Together, these objects, the key and the crossbow, the chisel and the quill, painted a complete picture of the man. He was a warrior, an accountant, a carpenter, and a warden. His life measured out in the weight of an iron key and the delicate scratch of a nib on parchment. Every sunrise, he would pick up these tools, and until the gates were barred at dusk, they were the instruments through which he shaped order from the chaos of the medieval world. The jangle of keys and the weight of the ledger did not belong only to men. While the role of bridge keeper was overwhelmingly male, the historical record holds quiet, determined exceptions. In a world defined by rigid social structures, a woman most often came to this position through the stark doorway of widowhood. When a keeper died, his widow did not simply grieve, she faced a critical juncture. The town council or local lord had a choice: to appoint a new man or to allow the widow to assume her husband's oath and responsibilities. For the authorities, this was often a practical decision. The woman already lived on the bridge, knew the toll rates, and understood the daily rhythms of the work. Appointing her maintained continuity and was often simpler than finding and training a stranger. So, with a solemn vow, a woman would step into her husband's role, the keys to the kingdom now hanging from her own belt. Her challenges, however, were immense and twofold. First was the ever-present threat to her physical safety. A lone woman in the toll house, known to hold coin, was a vulnerable target. She had to project an aura of unshakable authority from the moment a traveler approached, her voice firm and her gaze steady, to discourage any thoughts of easy prey. The second, more insidious challenge was the constant battle for respect. Burly carters and wealthy merchants, accustomed to dealing with a man, might question her calculations or try to intimidate her into lowering a toll. She had to possess a formidable knowledge of the rules and the courage to stand her ground in every confrontation, her word becoming the law on the bridge through sheer force of will. These women were not merely placeholders, they were shrewd business operators managing the tolls, running the side ventures like selling ale and food, and directing repair crews with a competence that often surpassed their husbands. Their success required a profound resilience, balancing the ledgers of both finance and personal risk. The story of a woman keeper is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to the quiet, often overlooked power women wielded in the gears of the medieval economy, holding a fragile piece of the world together from a small stone room over a flowing river. A silent conversation may have flowed along the river with the current, a hidden language understood only by the men who ruled the crossings. While no manual of bridge signals survives, the sheer necessity of their position makes it almost certain that keepers developed ways to speak across the miles. Imagine the advantage of knowing a lord's retinue was an hour away, allowing time to clear beggars and smooth the passage. Picture the urgent need to warn the next bridge of a flash flood roaring down the valley, giving a keeper precious minutes to bar his gates. This was a world without instant communication, where a simple flag or a specific sequence of horn blasts could mean the difference between order and chaos, profit and ruin. A white flag flown from a high pole on the toll house might signal that the way was clear and the bridge open for business. A red flag could indicate a blockage, a repair in progress, or a quarantine due to sickness. At night, the patterns would shift to light. A single lantern placed in a western window might be a routine all clear, while two lanterns moving in a slow circle could be a desperate warning of fire or approaching raiders. The sound of a horn was another powerful tool. One long, clear note might announce the approach of a royal official, prompting the keeper to ready his ledger and stand at formal attention. Two short, sharp blasts could signal a military column, a warning to secure any livestock and keep the common folk back. Three rapid bursts might be the universal signal of immediate danger, sending everyone scrambling for safety. This was not a formal network like the modern telegraph, but an organic system born of shared experience and mutual need. A keeper seeing a column of smoke from the next bridge upriver would not wait for a messenger. He would read the smoke itself, its color and density, and act. He knew the normal sounds of his stretch of river and any deviation. The distant crash of a falling tree, the unnatural silence of birds, was a message in itself. This hidden web of observation and signal turned a series of independent outposts into a coordinated line of defense and intelligence. The river was their wire, and the keepers were the operators, sending whispers of news and warning that kept the heart of the kingdom beating. The quiet horror of a body pulled from the river was a duty every keeper dreaded. When a drowned soul was found caught in the reeds or washed up on the gravel bank, his world shifted from commerce to coroner's law. His immediate task was to secure the scene, turning his bridge from a thoroughfare into a temporary morgue. He would send a runner, often his own son or an apprentice, to fetch the town's coroner, a royal official whose job was to determine the cause of any suspicious death. Until that authority arrived, the keeper was the sole guardian of the grim discovery, standing watch to ensure no one disturbed the body or the area where it was found. This was a sacred trust, a final service for the lost. His role in the investigation that followed was crucial. The coroner would assemble a jury of local men, and the keeper was always a key witness. His knowledge of the river made him an expert on its moods and secrets. He could look at the body's location and, reading the currents like a map, suggest where the person might have entered the water upstream. He knew the river's hidden traps, the deep, swirling eddies that could pull a man under, and the shallow, rocky stretches where a fall from a boat could be fatal. This was a form of medieval forensics, using the environment itself as evidence. His testimony extended beyond the water. The keeper knew the faces and habits of the local troublemakers. He could tell the coroner's jury if the deceased had been seen arguing with a known cutpurse on the bridge the day before, or if they had passed through his gate looking fearful or accompanied by suspicious individuals. He was the memory of the crossing, and his observations helped the jury piece together the victim's final hours. The inquest sought to answer one brutal question: was this death an accident, a suicide, or a murder? The keeper's insights were often the deciding factor. If a known drunkard was found drowned, and the keeper testified the man had stumbled across the bridge alone and visibly intoxicated the night before, the jury would likely rule it a tragic mishap. If a deeply indebted merchant was discovered, the keeper's ledger might show his recent, desperate travels, pointing towards self-destruction. But if the body showed signs of a struggle, and the keeper reported the victim had crossed with a large sum of money in the company of two armed men he did not know, the verdict would swiftly turn to murder. In these moments, the bridge keeper was more than a toll collector. He was an early agent of justice, his quiet observations helping to separate misfortune from malice, his bridge not just a crossing, but the first courtroom for the dead. But for a few glorious days each year, the grim duty of the keeper was washed away by a river of celebration. When a festival or a great market was proclaimed, his bridge transformed from a mere crossing into the vibrant, chaotic heart of the entire region. The approaches vanished under a sea of colorful stalls, their awnings flapping in the breeze. The air, usually thick with the smell of mud and livestock, now swirled with the scent of roasting meats, spiced wine, and sweet pastries. Jugglers and acrobats performed on cleared patches of cobblestone, their calls for attention competing with the shouts of merchants and the laughter of the crowd. This was the bridge at its most alive, a magnet for every soul seeking commerce, entertainment, or simply the joy of being part of a community. The keeper's role shifted dramatically during this temporary chaos. His primary concern was no longer just collecting tolls from travelers, but managing the festival itself. He became a combination of a traffic director, a market supervisor, and a public safety officer. With a sharp whistle and a commanding voice, he would create lanes through the throng, ensuring that a vital trade cart could still squeeze its way through the revelry. He mediated disputes between stallholders over a few precious inches of space, his authority the only law in the bustling microcosm, and for the privilege of setting up shop directly on his bridge or its approaches, every merchant and performer paid an extra fee. This was a lucrative bonus for the keeper and his lord, a tax on the very joy that the festival created. His ledger would fill with special entries for the pie seller, the alewife, and the man with the dancing bear, each payment granting a temporary license to profit from the crowd. In these fleeting moments, the bridge keeper was not just a guardian of stone, but the steward of his community's spirit, presiding over a temporary kingdom of music, trade, and shared humanity. The bridge keeper lived in a world of perpetual contradiction, surrounded by a river of humanity, yet stranded on an island of his own making. His authority, the very thing that gave him purpose, was also the wall that separated him from the community he served. Every day he spoke with hundreds of people, but these were fleeting, transactional encounters, a constant stream of faces that blurred together by dusk. He could not afford the easy familiarity of a village tavern keeper. His role demanded a certain distance, a stern impartiality that prevented him from forming the deep, casual friendships that defined medieval life for others. The tollhouse, perched between two worlds, was a lonely castle. His family shared this isolation, living in a glass bowl where their every meal and private moment could be observed by the passing crowd. The strain on his wife and children was unique, a life spent constantly performing for an audience of strangers, their home never truly their own. Yet within this strange existence, a different kind of community took root. The keeper shared a silent, unspoken bond with the other keepers up and down the river, men who understood the specific weight of the keys on his belt. A chance meeting with a ferryman from the next town was not just a social call, it was a vital exchange of information about river conditions, bandit activity, and the mood of the local lords. These were his true peers, the only people who could comprehend the pressure of standing between a town and a flood, and then there were the regulars, the familiar faces who provided the rhythm to his solitude. The miller who crossed every Tuesday with his sacks of grain, the weekly pilgrim on his way to a distant shrine, the fishwife with her daily catch, all became part of the keeper's shrunken social world. With them, he could share a brief, knowing nod, a snippet of news, or a comment on the weather. These small, consistent interactions were the threads that connected him to the human tapestry, a subtle reminder that even the most solitary guardian was still a part of the world he watched over. The keeper's kingdom, for all its stone and timber, was built on a foundation of local need and feudal obligation. That foundation began to crack as kingdoms grew stronger and more centralized. A distant king's tax collector saw the river of coin flowing from the bridge not as a local necessity, but as revenue for the crown. Slowly, surely, the state began to absorb the keeper's ancient powers. Royal commissions were formed to oversee the repair of major bridges, funded by national taxes rather than the keeper's collected tolls. The strongbox in the tollhouse was no longer his to manage alone, it was audited by a clerk from the capital, a man who cared nothing for the local price of a chicken or a day's labor. The keeper's authority, once absolute on his narrow strip of stone, was diluted by a growing bureaucracy that saw bridges as infrastructure, not as personal fiefdoms. His sacred oath to a local lord was replaced by a contract with a faceless government department. The role shifted from that of a sovereign guardian to a salaried employee, a profound change that stripped away centuries of tradition and autonomy. How could a man feel like the king of his bridge when his every decision was second-guessed by an official who had never even felt the river's spray? At the same time, the very stones he guarded were changing. The great age of cathedral and castle construction ushered in new engineering marvels. Bridges were increasingly built with more durable materials and more robust designs, their arches stronger and their piers deeper. The constant, desperate battle against decay and collapse began to ease. A well-constructed stone bridge, unlike its wooden predecessor, did not require daily vigilance against rot or the weekly clearing of silt. Major repairs, when needed, were handled by teams of skilled masons employed by the state, not organized by the keeper and a handful of laborers. The bridge itself was becoming less of a living, breathing entity that demanded a caretaker and more of a static, reliable monument. The slow, inevitable transition out of the Middle Ages spelled the end for this unique figure. The rise of turnpike trusts in later centuries formalized this shift, placing toll collection in the hands of corporations rather than individual keepers. The age of the Knight of the Road, the solitary guardian who was part sheriff, part engineer, and part spy, was drawing to a quiet close. His toll house fell silent, his ledger book closed for the last time, and the keys to his kingdom were handed over to the impersonal hands of progress. The keeper's shadow stretched long after his time, his stern figure stepping out of history and into the fireside tales of the common folk. These legends were born in the mist that clung to the stonework at dusk, where the boundary between the living and the dead felt as thin as the bridge was narrow. A phantom keeper was said to appear on certain bridges when the fog was thickest, his hand outstretched not for a coin, but for a toll paid in memory. Travelers would tell of a cold dread that fell upon them halfway across, a feeling of being watched from the empty tollhouse window. Some spoke of a spectral figure who would materialize, his features blurred by the mist, silently demanding a payment only a ghost could value. To refuse him was to risk being led astray in the fog, stumbling off the path and into the treacherous river. To pay him with a kind word or a whispered prayer was to find your way suddenly clear, the mist parting before you as if by an unseen hand. These stories transformed the keeper from a man of flesh and blood into an eternal guardian, a spirit whose duty outlasted even death itself. They served as a supernatural warning, a way to enforce good behavior on a dark and lonely road. Be respectful, the tales whispered, for you never know who is still collecting the toll. Greed was another potent fuel for these ghostly fires. The story of a miserly keeper who cheated his lord and his neighbors was a common one. In life, he might have overcharged travelers or pocketed coins that were meant for the bridge's repair. In death, his punishment was a cruel eternity of repetition. He was cursed to forever haunt his former domain, endlessly counting phantom coins that slipped through his ghostly fingers or trying to bar a gate that would no longer hold. His groans would echo from the stonework on stormy nights, a perpetual reminder of the sin of avarice. One famous Welsh legend tells of a keeper so corrupt he made a pact with the devil to increase his wealth. When he finally died, he could not rest, forced to guard a hidden treasure buried beneath the bridge, forever tempting but never able to claim it for himself. These cursed keeper tales were a form of moral instruction, a way for a society with few written laws to illustrate the dire consequences of abusing power. The bridge itself became a character in these stories, a sentient place that remembered the sins of its past guardians. A bridge that groaned in the wind was not just old timber, it was the lament of a betrayed keeper. A cold spot on a summer day was the lingering chill of his presence. This folklore reveals a profound truth about the medieval mind. The keeper, in his isolated tollhouse, was a figure of immense psychological power. He controlled a vital threshold, a place of transition that was inherently mysterious and a little frightening. It was only natural that the imagination would populate such a place with spirits, ensuring that the keeper's authority and the lessons he represented would never truly fade away. His world was a perfect, small-scale reflection of the medieval universe. The keeper was not just one thing, but a dozen roles fused into a single, formidable figure. He was the engineer who understood the physics of an arch, the banker who managed a river of coin and barter, and the sheriff who enforced the king's peace on his narrow strip of stone. His daily existence was a continuous dance between spiritual duty and brutal practicality, all while guarding the most critical piece of infrastructure in his world. This one man's secret life gives us a key to understanding everything about that distant time. Through his eyes, we see the gears of the medieval economy turning, measured in sacks of grain and lengths of cloth. We feel the ever-present dangers, from the cutpurse in the crowd to the flood surging against the piers. We witness the profound power of faith built into the very chapel where pilgrims prayed. And we observe the rigid social order where a nobleman paid in silver and a pauper paid in sweat. The next time you stand on an old stone bridge, do not just see a crossing. Look closer at the worn grooves in the stone and try to hear the echoes of the keeper's world. Picture the creak of the tollhouse door and the jingle of his heavy key ring. Think of the countless stories that passed through his gate. Every bridge that survives from that era is a monument to his forgotten vigilance. We would love to hear what you discover. Do you know of an old bridge in your own town with a strange history or a local legend about its guardian? Share those stories in the comments below, and let's keep the memory of these silent sentinels alive.